Hello, my name's Saul Marmot. I'm one of the GPs who works with the Bromley By Bow Health partnership. We work in very close relations with the Bromley By Bow Centre. In fact, one of our surgeries is on the Bromley By Bow Centre site, and this is really how our relationship started. I've been lucky enough to be here for over 20 years now. I've had some wonderful experiences and learned an awful lot. Essentially today I've been asked to talk to you about the social determinants of health. Now this is an expression that's been around for a while now. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to condense decades of research into a few minutes of presentation, so I hope it makes sense, and I hope that you can bear with me and bear with my appalling technology skills as I get it wrong. If I get anything wrong, please just bear with me. Okay, so what are the social determinants of health? Essentially, it's the interaction between your environment and your health. So it's how your environment affects your long-term health outcomes, and it's how your health affects your long-term environment. Let's start at an early age. So let's start just before birth. There's plenty of evidence to say that the environment around the time when you're in your mother's womb, all the way through till about the age of 4 or 5, is probably your most important formative environment of your life. So for example, what's your mother's nutrition like when she's pregnant with you? Does she smoke? Does she drink? Does she have access to exercise facilities? All of these things will have a big difference. Then of course, when you're born, is she able to breastfeed? Is it normal within her community to breastfeed? Are there any other barriers in the way? Does she need to go back to work at a young age? And then of course, how you eat as you grow up, as you're forming your physical self, your brain, and your lifelong patterns. Have you actually got access to decent food? Of course, as you grow a little more, do you have the right facilities at home? Is there resource? Is there economic resource, for example, to afford music lessons, riding lessons, extracurricular activities? Have you got the latest gadgets? Will you be sociable acceptable? Do you have the right phone? Have you got laptops? Have you got everything else that all the other kids want to play with? So of course, these early years set you up throughout life. So if we take two people, you've got, here we go with the technology. Okay, right, that didn't go so well. You either live here or you live here. So these are not extreme differences in environment here. These often are two different types of houses that exist on the same streets in London. So you've got children on one side of the street who live in one type of accommodation, and you've got children in the other side of the street who live in the other. Of course, there's an awful lot more room, and there's room outside as well as inside. There's also some pride in your environment. Is this your local playground? Or is this your local playground? These things make a difference. So you've got child A who's living in a slightly impoverished area. You've got child B who's living in I suppose what we would call a much more normal middle class environment. So those environments do make a difference to your life. And of course, they set you up in life for your future. So let's move these children on a little bit, a few years in fact. Let's say they're doing their GCSEs at the moment. How do those environments and how does that upbringing make a difference to their outcome? First thing, obviously, is the school. Are they in an area where the school is good, where the teachers really care, where they've attracted enough talent in the teaching, and where there aren't the distractions from other kids in school, where you're allowed to actually want to achieve without people thinking that you're worthless or useless? Is there a gang culture? What's your playground like at school? Can your school afford textbooks? Do the parents need to buy the textbooks for their children? Have they got good equipment at school, like a music department, an IT department, computer suites, all the rest of it? And then, of course, if you're not doing so well, can your parents afford to hire tutors? Can they afford private tutors, private books at home? Have they actually got the time to sit down with you themselves to go through stuff, to help, to look things up on the internet? And of course, this pertains to when you're younger as well, you know, in those early years that we talked about earlier. Do your parents have the resource to be able to sit down, to read you stories, to talk to you, to try and encourage you? You know, I remember the story of one mum coming in to see me with her 3-year-old, really wasn't verbalizing very well, wasn't really speaking very well. And I said to her, you know, well, what's he like in conversation with you? And she said, I don't talk to him. He doesn't understand. I said, okay, what sort of books do you read to your child? She went, why would I read him books? He doesn't understand anything. It's not that she was a bad mum. It's not that she wasn't trying hard. It's just that she didn't have the resource. She didn't know that this was what she was supposed to do. And she didn't have a library full of books, as, you know, my children are lucky enough to have. So back to GCSE times. Have you got room to work? You know, if you're living in that overcrowded flat, what sort of distractions are there in the background? You know, who else is living in that house? What else is going on in the room that you're trying to work in? So I'm sitting here in the room, I'm trying to concentrate. It's a single room in a flat with maybe 2 bedrooms with 6 people living in it. There's obviously an awful lot going on. So look, I'm trying to work here. Would you just be quiet? I wish it was as easy as that, really. Unfortunately, it's not. So if I'm sitting in that room at that desk, you know, I had a child came to see me doing his GCSEs last year, and he wanted a letter of support. And I thought, what do you want a letter of support for? And he said, well, essentially, I'm living in a flat with 6 other people. There are 2 bedrooms, so 2 people sleep in 1 bedroom, 2 people sleep in another, and 2 people sleep in the lounge. Now, that same lounge has got the table, the dining table, where they all eat at. And this is the place where this person had to study in the midst of all of that at the same table in the same room. And he was just finding it impossible. Of course, you know, all these differences have been made much more obvious during lockdown. You know, if you have your own room to work in, you're much more likely to get your schoolwork done. I heard something on the radio which interested me, and it was people phoning in to say, my children go to private schools, they're getting Zoom lessons from the teachers every day. Why can't state schools do this? And I heard a lot of anger from state school parents saying, yes, why can't they do that? Now, obviously, there's a big resource differential between different schools. So sometimes it's not so possible, but also it's the home environment. So do they have access to Wi-Fi? Do they have access to laptops, to computers? So some households don't have any computers or laptops. Some might have one, but if you're at home with all your siblings, what happens when everybody needs their laptop, especially if you've got a parent who's working from home too? Are you going to be able to do your homework? Are you going to be able to concentrate? Have you got access to the technology? Have you got access to an outside space? Is there a nice garden for you to go walk in? Is there nice open space with trees where you can avoid seeing people, you know, still manage with your social distances? And of course, this applies to adults as well. You know, do you have access to food? Can you afford to buy masks and sanitizers? What's your working environment like? You know, are you working in an overcrowded working space? Do you have gym equipment at home? Do you have running shoes that you can do all of that stuff? So obviously, you know, these differences have been really exaggerated, I'd say, by lockdown. Okay, so let's take those 2 children again who were raised in the different places, who then had the different experience during their GCSEs. What happens when they grow up and they have their own family? So, for example, do they work here? This is a picture of a meat processing plant. Obviously, it's been in the news a lot recently. the main reason that these have been in the news is because of the overcrowding and the poor working conditions. So there's absolutely no way that you can socially distance. There's also no way that you can go and have a word with your boss and say, this is just not good enough, because there's plenty of other people who need the work. However, if you work in this environment, you're much more in control. It's a much nicer environment. So it actually makes a big difference to your outcomes as an adult. It's not so much whether you're in work or out of work, although that has a massive effect. It's also about the working conditions in the place that you work in. Do you eat? Do you buy your food from here? Or do you buy your food from here? You know, obviously the second one is a food bank. There's an awful lot of social stigma involved in food banks. So a lot of people go hungry, and actually some people don't even know how to access them. So I spoke to a guy a couple of weeks ago who was being really rude on the phone. You know, I phoned him up to talk to him about his health. You know, he had some complaint, something to do with a bad back. And I was flabbergasted by how grumpy and how rude he was. Until eventually it transpired the reason he'd been rude is because he hadn't eaten in a week. So this guy had no access to any welfare or benefits, had no access to any food, and was literally starving. And of course, when I realized this, it had a massive impact on the rest of the consultation. So you're an adult. Let's say you're working. Let's say you have your own family, and you've still got person A and person B who we've been following through their lives. What happens when you get sick? So if you get sick in some environments, say, for example, what does that do at work? You know, you might have insurance at work so that work can have you off sick for a couple of months. They've got insurance scheme. Actually, they don't miss you very much. You can recover at home. What if you haven't got that? What if you then have to survive on statutory sick pay? You know, people are spending their entire statutory sick pay just on rent. Therefore, obviously, how are they going to afford food? The two pictures we saw earlier, the farmer's market or the food bank, what's the quality of food like? What are the prices like? You know, can you afford to give the good food to your children, to yourself? So actually, when you're sick and you then potentially lose your job, does that then make things much worse? You go in a downward spiral. You haven't got family and friends who can help support you through this time. You're certainly not got a boss who's going to help support you through this time. What are you doing for yourself? And more importantly, what are you doing for your family? Are they all eating the poor food? Are they all living with somebody who's totally depressed, who's down on their luck, who can't get out, who's more likely to get angry, who's more likely to be shouting at them? What about accessing healthcare? So we all know we're very lucky to have the NHS in this country, and the NHS does a fabulous job. However, it's a limited resource. There are limited medications, and there are limited resources within the NHS. For example, waiting times might be really, really long. You've got something wrong with you. It takes 6 months to see a specialist, and then another 6 months on a waiting list before they deal with it. What if you've got access to private healthcare, or your job, through your job, you've got private healthcare insurance? What else could you access then? So first of all, you could get your stuff done an awful lot quicker. If you need an operation, it'll happen much sooner. If you need to see a specialist, it'll happen much sooner. But all those other benefits, like, for example, you could see a chiropractor, you could see a physiotherapist, you might even have access to a personal trainer. All of these things will make a massive difference to your health outcomes and also to your confidence in being able to deal with the effects of your ill health on your future and on your family's future. So, if you're sick and you're poor and you haven't got the personal resource, the access to information, the ability, the belief that you can make a positive difference to your health outcomes, obviously that has a massive effect on your mental health too. Your mental health then deteriorates, as does your physical health, because obviously they work in a cycle. You know, the more depressed, the more anxious you are, the less likely you are to be able to recover from your physical health, and the less likely you are to be able to access those resources that might help you. So obviously, all of these things have an effect on the next generation. They have an effect on the next generation, which means that then the next generation starts again at the beginning, where we started with kid A and kid D, and these inequalities do get perpetuated. So the slide I've got up here just is some headlines. These are the main areas of the social determinants of health. So you've probably seen countless slides like this. There are so many different ones, and they all say slightly different things. Importantly, one of the social determinants of health is your economic situation. So the economic situation of you and your family, but also the economic situation of your community. Have you got access to healthy food? Have you got access to good education? What's the expectation of your school? What's the expectation of your parents? Will they be able to push you? Will you be able to achieve? And of course, the environment that you live in. So the house that you particularly live in, is it damp? Does it have a garden? Is it overcrowded? Is it a lovely house that, you know, there's plenty of freedom and space in? Do you have access to open spaces? What about work? Do you actually have work? Are you in work? If you are in work, what's the work environment like? And healthcare. So we're very fortunate, as I said, to have access to good healthcare in this country, much more fortunate than lots of places across the world, but there is still a massive difference in what you can and can't afford just because of your social class. So here's my summary slide. Your health is about three things. It's about your physical health, it's about your mental health, and it's about your social health. And if all three of those things are in balance, then that will make a massive difference to your overall health. If all those things are in balance, then hopefully your next generation will be able to progress and to deal with the things that it's thrown at it, sorry. So that in a nutshell is the social determinants of health. I'd normally take questions at this time, but quite obviously that is not going to happen. So I hope it's been informative. I hope it's been at the right level, and thank you for bearing with me with the absolutely appalling IT skills. Hopefully we'll see you again sometime. Bye.